welcome to the M-Word CIC. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Steve back in with me. Today's a very special session because we met literally by reading his original article around his experience for himself and his daughter, who was really struggling at school. Now, obviously, I don't know the histories and all the ins and outs of it, so I'm going to keep my mouth very quiet and shut so that Steve can take over and really tell us the experiences for himself as a head teacher, and then himself as an experience with his parenting in and around his daughter who started to deteriorate with her mental health. So I was thinking as you were speaking a few minutes ago about how valuable, we talk about graded exposure and we talk about transitions can be very challenging. So for your daughter, the transitions about using the car being associated very negatively with going to school. But gardening at home in those first couple of months from when she stopped attending school would never have been associated with school. So you'd done something that was very organic, pardon the pun, at home, but using that as the template allowed her to transition back into school, which is really interesting because we don't generally, as education, we don't generally think about how can we do something that's very naturally done at home, associated warmly as being a home thing. I do this, I'm okay with this. So I find that very interesting. But also, let's just think about these two new people in her life that are now part of her school help support. So we've talked about the mental health practitioner. What exactly do they do, and how often do they meet? Are you able to kind of enlighten us a bit more about what they do?
Yeah, so racking my brains here. So we had support from a local service through the NHS, through Healthy Minds. It's a mental health practitioner based in the same town as us.
Yeah.
And I think this started around, I think it was April last year.
Okay.
And as a start, it was me and my wife taking our daughter to an appointment at a centre. Well, it's part of a bit medical, but the mental health team are based there. And I can remember, I mean, the first appointment, was still very tricky. Our daughter was highly anxious. It involved a very short car journey. She was distressed. She didn't want to go in. She didn't want to meet somebody new. But the first appointment was meeting this lady, an experienced mental health practitioner, and basically, getting to know us and filling in some forms. From that, she was put on a program of support, which I think typically is something like 6 to 8 weeks.
Yes.
It's I guess essentially a type of CBT.
Yep. So cognitive
And
behavior therapy. Yep.
thank you. I'm glad you said that. And for the first few sessions, we would go and attend with her.
Right.
And the practitioner was delightful, a really calm, quiet disposition. Of course, why would it wouldn't expect anything else really, but was all really positive. But again, it was difficult for our daughter at first. But also that evolved. So eventually it moved from us being with her at this building, eventually as another kind of way back into school, the appointments were moved to a room in school.
Nice.
And maybe the first four, I think, were, off-site, and then they were in school. And again, for a few in school, my wife or I would attend with her. And then it was suggested that we pull back,
Yeah.
and she would attend without us. So the last sort of 3 or 4 sessions, we weren't present.
Yeah.
And it was done very sensitively. So this was then through the summer term when she was also attending gardening club. And it meant that also the practitioner would join us. She was advocating for our daughter. At one point, we were in TAC, Team Around the Child, so she would join us in that.
Yes.
Later on, it was decided with our agreement that TAC wasn't the right mechanism, and an EBSA worker was brought in, which has been invaluable.
Yes.
And so it's meant that ultimately our daughter was equipped with tools for managing her anxiety. She was supported as she recovered from the very difficult phase of illness.
Yes.
And we were given a graded exposure plan, which has, and you know, people have different opinions about graded exposure. And what I would say is we were given a plan which set out some very helpful steps for what our daughter needed at that point in time. But it wasn't just about school. So, you know, one of her first steps was to go to her best friend's house,
Yeah.
and that would have involved oh, I'm really sorry, there's somebody at my front door.
Go for it.
Just 1 second. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the graded exposure plan was, so one of the first things was visiting a friend, and her best friend, who she was very close to but hadn't seen as much for a number of months, and lives in a village away from our town, and it involved a drive. So it was things like, you know, going in the car and visiting her house and maybe
Yeah.
staying 5 minutes, but with me present. But
Yes.
what we did, it kind of hit the summer holiday, the end of the support from her mental health practitioner. And what we did was we kind of interpreted the graded exposure plan to gradually introduce new challenges and experiences, but we also interpreted it to influence what the reduced timetable looked like in school. So we kind of took the principles of it
Yeah.
and the, you know, thinking about steps, and then we interpreted that to make a part-time timetable which
Nice.
reintroduced her to schooling.
Nice. Nice. And the ESPAS you said, so um the educational, I'm assuming this is educational welfare, is it? So
EBSA, so
EBSA, sorry.
uh, emotionally based school avoidance. There's a
There we go.
team. I believe it's these teams exist nationally, but not all local authorities have them. So we're
Have
lucky to
them.
have a team in our county, and um, it was decided by the school's pastoral team and inclusion leader that, and with our agreement, that a more helpful way forward rather than going down the TAP route was to bring in an EBSA worker.
Yeah.
And so that meant the return in September had the benefit of input from a mental health practitioner and an EBSA worker whose specialism is more around
Yeah.
uh, anxiety and school
Yes.
attendance.
Yeah.
And then so we've got our next EBSA meeting tomorrow, at which time we'll review the last month and we'll make a plan for the next 3 weeks after Easter.
And how often do they meet with your daughter?
So the EBSA caseworker doesn't, she's not involved at all directly
Really?
with my daughter. I how would you decide? I guess she advocates for our daughter, and she
Right.
champions her, and she supports us, and she advises the school. So
Right.
she attends the meetings,
Yeah.
and she's just this kind of radiant voice of positivity. She's always so supportive of how far our daughter's come and how
Yeah.
proud she is of her.
Yeah.
Um, and so she, you know, we kind of run the plan past her and say, "What do you think?" Or, you know, if this has been a stumbling block, what do we do? How do we navigate this? Because the other thing to say is, and we haven't really touched upon this, is things don't always go to plan. It's not been
Yeah.
it's not been linear since last February. There've been lots of ups and downs. There've been some low times. There've been things that haven't gone as we expected, and then other things that have surprised us.
Yes.
So it's an unpredictable journey. It's
Yeah.
just not linear.
Yeah. So kind of bringing it all together then with the experience, where are you now then? Do you think your daughter will ever be able to return to school full time? Or do you think that this is probably getting to the point where it's as good as it's going to get?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um, I think we've never, apart from as I mentioned earlier, our view was always we'll get her better and she'll
yeah,
come back.
yeah,
So we've never even discussed with me and my wife or with our daughter what the end goal is,
yeah,
really.
yeah,
We've been very cautious about setting kind of deadlines. So one of the things early on, because originally when I left my job, the plan was that I would have a year to try and focus on my own recovery. And then my hope originally was that I would be well enough to get a job again. And at a few points, perhaps when she was more struggling, my daughter, every now and then she would say, "When have you got to get a job again?" And like, when when do you need to be better, or we won't have any money, that sort of thing. And I was always keen to kind of stop that and say, "No, that's not your worry. I'm just taking time out. Don't be thinking about, when you need to be better."
yeah,
So we've tried not to spell it out. We've reached a point where things have really stepped up in the last month, but it's taken all these months to get here.
yeah,
Last week she was really tired emotionally, physically, because every day that she was in, she did 3 or 4 lessons.
yeah,
And as well as the anxiety relating to that, of course, she's out of habit and just developing that stamina
yeah,
and that mental capacity is going to take time. So I think we've reached, and I shouldn't say too much, but in our meeting tomorrow with the school and the EBSA worker, what I'll be saying is I think we just need to all be really mindful of where we've got to, because where we've got to is massive progress.
absolutely. And quite
Um,
fast when you think about it's just coming to a year.
yeah, and so I think we need to be really mindful that actually she's almost in, for 4 days a week, she's in almost all of those days.
Yeah,
And the other thing to say is all the way since last September, we also do learning at home.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not like we're just, dossing or avoiding schoolwork. There's always been a balance, but now the weight has shifted. And because she's mostly in school, there's much less learning at home. Thursday is her day at home, and that's kind of protected time. But we do, we'll tackle 3 or 4 lessons in that day. But our hope, I think, as parents, is that she'll be well enough and have the capacity to ultimately return full time.
Yeah,
But we don't really want to put any labels or targets because, if you look at how the progress has been, then we might say, well, by July, she'll probably be back full time. But we need to be really cautious that we don't do all this work for all these months and then
yeah.
put too much expectation on her and suddenly, you know,
So my clinical experience around recovery for young people, especially when they've had a complete mental health breakdown, which is exactly what your daughter's had. My experience is recovery can be quite swift. However, that's not the most challenging part. The most challenging part is the stability. So, what you really need to consider is another year of being stable. And the reason why that is really strongly recommended is because when we think about adults within mental health who have a complete breakdown, recovery is okay, but being stable in the first year runs the highest risk for having another breakdown. So, you know, it's a very thin line. How much is recovery and how much is being stable? Because if you don't get the recovery right, you're not going to get the stability right. And this stamina or resilience, whatever people want to refer to it as, children have already shown that they have been terribly resilient at the cost of their mental ill health. So it's imperative that in order to protect a child with their mental health going forward to adulthood, you're kind of trying to look at this future. In order to protect that, you want to make sure that the stability period is as long as successful as possible. So a lot of my work is helping young people repair with their mental health. And that, you know, is amazing progress. But the real progress is the following year, where you're keeping them stable. So already I'm hearing that your daughter last week has been tired, and there's your monitoring clue. Keep it at that. And if she needs to take a step back, then she would be well encouraged to do that from my perspective as a mental health clinician. But if you can do another year of just keeping her just bubbling along at that level, you're building her stamina and resilience, and then she's going to be stronger to think about the next level up. But I also would encourage school to consider that at any point when she says, hold on a minute, I'm really wobbly, you know, and there will be peak points in an academic year, those points she needs immediate respite. And if you do that, she'll be a winner. She'll hopefully protect her mental health for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
But it's tricky because, of course, the pressure, you know, is okay. So you look normal, you seem normal, yeah, you're not experiencing much more anxiety anymore. You've got it sussed. Let's get back to work. And actually, no, hang on a minute. Let's get the recovery 100% right. And most people are not really encouraged to think about that. I am, because I've been working in every field of mental health to look at recovery, both within acute settings and community settings. But, you know, I have that luxury as a specialist. Most people don't have that knowledge, that inside knowledge. You're gaining that inside knowledge because you're right there and then with your daughter.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I completely understand and agree with what you say. I think that the risk is the closer you get to what might be perceived as kind of the finish line or 100% in school, the risk is that the pressure comes to, well, we're nearly there now. Just
Yeah.
next week, let's just go full on.
Yeah.
And it's about, as you say, that baseline
Yeah.
being strong and making sure that suddenly we don't rush to the perceived finish because it's not a finish, nothing's finished.
Nothing's finished, and you'll undo all that hard work that everybody's put in. And worse, if you have a second breakdown,
Yeah,
you will be very vulnerable because, of course, you're not so resilient the next time. You know what it's been like to do all that hard work, and then you have that second breakdown and you are just emptied. Your tank is, you know, it's in the minus. And so then you have to try and find some energy, some hope that you can get it back like you did, but you will never be as strong. You're just going to be brittle. It'll be another fracture, a hairline fracture, you know, with your broken leg syndrome. So, of course, you put pressure on that and start running, you will break it. So it's absolutely imperative. The recovery is relatively straightforward, but it's the period after that's the most crucial. And we never seem to kind of consider that, but we must, because your daughter has not become mentally unwell because of what's been going on at home. It's that transition, it's that school side of things that have been beyond her control. And, you know, with support, and you've done it really, really well, but I think that's part of your skill set and your knowledge set as a head teacher, you've been able to kind of navigate the system far better than most of the parents, because they're not in your position. But by protecting that, you've got to protect this most important year now. Keep it stable, no breakdowns, and you'll be a winner with it. If we have a wobble, that's okay, but if you deteriorate and go back down, that will just destroy her. And you know, we don't want adults with poor mental health, especially when it's not their doing.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
that all makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Well, listen, you've been amazing as ever
Thank
in
you.
helping us have a much better understanding, both from a head teacher perspective as well as a parent, but also just learning in really good details about what was going on for your daughter. It's been really, really helpful. And I'm really grateful to you for all your time that you've given us in doing this. It's been so lovely having you. Thank
Oh,
you
it's an
so
absolute pleasure.
thank you so much.
I mean, you know, it's a whole world, and if it helps one person, then that's time very well spent, in my view. So yeah, I hope it's been of use.
That's really good. Thank you so much.